All right. Go to next one. So Mimo Live is playing music right now. Do you hear that? You're muted right now.
Okay, you hear the music. Because normally when you go live, Steve, your my hint?
We are live.
We're live. How exciting. Hello, everybody. How does my video look? Does it look any different? Does it perhaps,
amazing.
are the colors more vibrant? Do they look higher density or anything? This is the Logitech, oh shoot, what's the name of it? It's the 4K Pro. So this is a 4K version of the Logitech camera that I had before. And it is, like I said, it's 4K, but it also magnetically sticks to the top of the Pro Display XDR, which is exciting. Color is much, much better. Definitely happier with the color.
Well, you have a very red shirt on, that's for sure.
I do. Should we introduce the family before we do roll call? Why don't you, are you showing both of us, Steve?
I'm showing both of us. Maybe what we should do is I'm going to zoom in on just you.
Okay.
A little more.
Gotta move my mic.
That's what I'm calling the family portrait. All of our vehicles currently operating, or some of
Sojourner.
them not operating on Mars.
Sojourner, Spirit, Opportunity. Who's that? Curiosity, Perseverance, and Steve's favorite? Ingenuity.
Jenny. Jenny flew. I think third time just recently.
Third time, yeah.
Three's a charm.
All right.
And then, not to be outdone, there's the blue version.
He got this for me for my birthday, and he bought himself a shirt too. What we were able to do, but look, he also bought me a Perseverance Hot Wheels. Should I do an unboxing? I kind of want to play with it.
No.
Are you going to make me keep it mint in box?
Mint in box.
Well, okay. Last time you got me two of them, one I could play with and one that was mint in box.
All right. I guess I can get you a second one. You can open
be good.
It is your birthday present.
It is my birthday present. Well, let's do roll call. Yes. We've got Alan and Bruce and Jason and Jill and John and Mike and Rick and Sandy and Michael. And who else is here in the sidebar? Jill, did I say Jill already? Yep. Who else is in here?
Frank.
Oh, Frank is here. Hi, Frank. Roll call. All right. Well, we have done a sound check, so I think we are good to go. Except for the fact that I am unable to mute Steve. No matter what I do to mute, I can still hear him. It is inexplicable.
Virus I planted.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I could do this. I can't hear you now. I muted my speakers.
Are you sure, Allison?
I can talk to me right now.
I'm talking to you.
No, I cannot hear you.
I want now.
Yes. Something is definitely wonky with my audio system, but let's hope it doesn't do anything else to us here. So let's drag in the NosillaCast music here and get started with the recording because we have a ways to go here. It's 5:03. Time to get moving. -16. There we go. All right. So, yeah, Steve is muted, but I can still hear him. So I would really like to know how that's happening. So I will mute my headphones. Silence. It's lovely. But I can't hear myself. Oh, I haven't started to play yet. Sandy's saying I don't hear music. Okay, here we go. No, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. I can't mute the audio. I can't mute the audio. I can't hear the music. I can't mute the audio. I can't hear the music. Okay, you need 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 the music.
Hold on, folks. We'll try to finish
fixing it. Okay, you need the music. Okay, you need the music. Okay, you need him music. Okay, you need him music. Okay, you need him music. Okay, you need
Yeah,
him
this is a
music.
recurring
Okay, you
problem
need him
with that.
music. Okay, you need him 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 music.
There. That did it. Okay. Well, she did something to stop it. We'll figure out what it is. Hold on, folks. We'll be right back. She needs to work on her audio a little.
How about now?
All right. Sound good now?
All right. So
Was this the loopback thing that you were going to investigate if you got into that condition again?
your audio is cutting in and out. I can't understand you.
How's my audio in the chat room, folks? Do you hear me okay? Allison says I'm cutting in and out. It's good? So it must just be Mimo.
Talk some more, Steve.
How about now, Allison? Am I still cutting in and out?
Yeah, it's like your voice is modulating, going low and high and low and high. Well, I'm going to start trying to record again. And that's when things went to heck in a handbasket. So
you want to try going back in the chat room or no? Because they don't hear you right now.
Okay, I am back in the chat room. And Steve, I need you to just not talk. Everything you can do to not make noise when I'm trying to record, because I can't stop your audio from coming through. This is so fun. All right, I'm running a debugger log that I should have been running. They're telling me I got to run the debug logs constantly every single time I use Audio Hijack till I catch it again, which is tedious. All right, let me try recording. Hindenburg failed to start record. No tracks are record enabled. You were a minute ago. All right, here we go. Hi, this is Allison Sheridan of the NosillaCast podcast, hosted at podfeet.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever so slight Apple bias. Today is Sunday, April 25th, 2021, and this is show number 833. Well, this weekend, Steve and I went to see our kids for our birthdays. They're fully vaccinated, and we've had both shots, so we're doing pretty good. I knew I wouldn't be able to enjoy the grandkids if I had to work on the show during the weekend, so I asked George from Tulsa if he could pull something interesting together for us, and he came through like a champ. I really appreciate him coming through for me. You know, I also did a shout out into the Slack group, and it turns out Bruce, also known as Use the Data, and Frank, also known as Wheels, both sent in articles as well, but I didn't know they were coming, so those are actually going to be next week or the week after. But thank you all for letting me have a relaxing weekend with the family by sending in this great help. I am tongue-twisted today. All right, you're approved to speak for a moment, Steve.
So, okay, we'll check this out. See how this goes.
Okay. All right, we're going to do a chapter mark. which I need to do there. Back here. Hindenburg. Copy. And copy. There we go. All right. And I saved. All right, Rick, save and chat and add the chapter mark.
Good job, Rick.
Good job. All right. There we go. Preview. I don't know that this is the easier way to do this. Okay. Mute yourself. No, Doc. Okay, here we go. This week's guest on Chit Chat Across the Pond is Doc Rock, and he's there with me to talk about the Apple Spring Loaded event. Doc's background in all things Apple, as well as high-end live video, makes him the perfect person to talk to about this particular event. He explains to me how this color calibration of our TVs using our iPhones and Apple TV will work. We talk about whether the cool colors of the iMacs might be a distraction to photographers. We talk about how the coolest things that got nearly zero airtime was having Ethernet over a MagSafe connector, and how much we all want the new keyboard with Touch ID, but how it will only work with M1 Macs. In the end, Doc also tries to convince me that I need a 1 terabyte 12.9-inch iPad Pro. The discussion we had is not a linear walkthrough of the event by any means, but it's more of a meandering talk about what had us interested, and we tell stories to each other. I had an absolute blast, and I can prove Doc had fun too, because he suggested we get together after the next 2 Apple events this year. I think you'll get a big kick out of this conversation, so please take a look for Chit Chat Across the Pond in your podcatcher of choice. Stumbled a little at the end there. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
I started a new way of doing this, and I don't think I like it very much. All right, chapter mark. Hey, how come I didn't get a save and chapter mark?
You just did.
I forgot about the lag, right?
Right. Well, yeah.
Hang on. I forgot I'm going to say something fun at the end of this. I think you'll get a big kick out of this conversation. So we get together after the next 2 Apple events this year. Okay, I'm recording here. And I'm not doing a chapter mark because that's not what I'm going to do next. I think you'll get a kick out of this conversation as well, and I really hope you check out this episode of Chit Chat Across the Pond Lite in your podcatcher of choice. Now, with that said, I have to say it is an absolute miracle that this particular episode of Chit Chat Across the Pond ever got to your feed. First of all, we scheduled our conversation for March 24th because of all the rumor sites that said that there would be an announcement that very week, and then the announcement didn't happen. Then the same rumor site said we'd have an announcement on April 6th, so we scheduled it for that week. Again, no announcement. Finally, Apple announced their spring-loaded event for April 20th, so we scheduled our chit-chat for the following day. In the third problem for this recording, we had a time zone mix-up, and I showed up way before Doc thought we were meeting. The irony of this situation is that while I was waiting for Doc, I worked on an article about my time shifter clock, the design of which is for people to send a time in the future in different time zones when they want to meet. And you guessed it, I didn't use my time shifter clock when I talked to Doc about the time I wanted to meet him. Anyway, when we finally did connect, I showed him the clock and he loved it and he bookmarked it. When I tried to start a Skype session with Doc, Skype opened the call window, but it never called him. I tried it 3 times. I force quit the app. I tried it again, but Skype was having nothing to do with me. I was forced to reboot my Mac while Doc had to wait. After the reboot, Skype allowed me to call Doc. All right, we got to be good now. So finally, it's time to record. I did a test recording, I listened to it, and it sounded great. I asked Doc if he'd like to record his own voice so we'd have the best possible recording of him to combine with my recording of me, and he agreed. He's all over this recording stuff, so this was pretty easy for him. We started chatting, and 13.5 minutes in, I checked Audio Hijack to see how long we'd been talking, and I hadn't restarted my recording after I ran the test. I may have said a non-Girl Scout safe word at that moment that did have to be edited out later. And luckily, Doc checked his and he discovered he was actually recording both of us, not just him. So we had a recording. We decided that as a safety net, I would start recording my voice from that point forward with Audio Hijack. Another 15 minutes into that part of the recording, and I had that horrible looping audio problem I think I've mentioned on the show before. Let me play you a short clip of what I was hearing when I was talking to Doc. Let's see. Where did I put that? Is that oh, it's on my desktop, I think. Here we go. Sorry, guys, you're going to hear that looped audio, but it's not actually happening live. Okay, here we go. When I was talking to Doc.
We don't hear it, Al. Al, I
You
don't hear it.
don't.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Do you have to separate that into two tracks? I see a light blue, not a solid blue.
I don't know what you're talking about. It's not blue at all. It's orange.
Well, before you hit it, it was light blue, different color blue. There you go.
Okay.
That'll do it.
I was talking to Doc.
It's going to be fantastic out of the box. Let's not get crazy because this just the hardware is just Curly Crust Intel's dreams. Curly Crust Intel's dreams. Curly Crust Intel's dreams.
I think that's probably as long as anybody's going to want to listen.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that, you think that was loopback?
I don't know what it is.
But it wasn't.
I don't know if it's Audio Hijack, Loopback, Sound Source. It's something from Rogue Amoeba because none of the applications I'm running right now were running except for those Audio Hijack programs.
But we know it's not Mimo because that was.
We
not
know
in the
it's not
picture.
Mimo because Mimo wasn't running. We know it's not Hindenburg because Hindenburg wasn't running. We know it's not Discord because Discord wasn't running. We know it wasn't Mars Edit because Mars Edit wasn't running. Everything I was running that at that time, the only thing in common with the live show was the stuff from Audio Hijack, but it's from Rogue Amoeba. But let me keep going with the story because that's
Sure.
what I'm going to be describing. It doesn't help us in any way to know this information, unfortunately. But here goes. Okay, isn't that lovely? This happening during a Skype call was actually good news. This exact problem has happened 3 times before, but it only happens during the live show. Trying to figure out which of the, 26 apps I run for the live show has been impossible. Which one of those could be causing it? Mimo Live and Hindenburg are complex applications for video and audio, and they run during the live show, along with 3 different apps from Rogue Amoeba, Audio Hijack, Sound Source, and Loopback. I've been in discussion with all of the companies, but now I know that the only vendor between the plain Skype call and the live show, the vendor that's common is Rogue Amoeba. So I know it's something from Rogue Amoeba causing this, but we still don't know what it is. With the problem I'm having, that looping simply doesn't stop. But from Doc's perspective, he wasn't able to tell that anything was wrong. Obviously, I wasn't able to understand a word he was saying, but I figured out that he could hear me clearly, so I took off my headphones and I wrapped them around my mic so that he could hear what I was hearing. I really wish I'd been recording video so you could have seen the look on his face when he heard it. Well, I couldn't give up this opportunity to capture some data about the problem to give to Rogue Amoeba, so I left Doc hanging while I pulled a sample from Activity Monitor for Audio Hijack before quitting both Audio Hijack and Skype and reconnecting to Doc. I'm glad it happened with someone who does the same kind of work because he took it completely in stride. I keep thinking how my interviews at CSUN would have gone if this had happened during one of those. After that, it was clean sailing for the rest of the recording, and Doc pulled the audio from his Rodecaster Pro and he sent it off to me. And the file was 5 megabytes. If you know anything about audio, it's not possible for an hour-long conversation to be 5 megabytes. Doc checked again and discovered the right file, and we both sighed with relief. After we hung up, I started working on editing the audio. Luckily, with the Rodecaster Pro, he was able to make markers in the file for me where the problems had occurred, and that made it far easier for me to work on the editing. Right around that time, Steve wandered by, and I told him how delighted I am with the new lamp he got me for my studio. So I'm still working on the audio, and he's coming in and we're talking about the studio. My old one was pretty ugly, and the glass was broken on a couple of the bowls around the light, so he got me this new one for my birthday, and he had just put it together while I was chatting with Doc. I noticed that there was a little sticker on one of the plastic areas and he offered to take it off for me. And of course, it left some residue on the plastic. He brought in some goof off to remove the glue, and I'm not sure why it bothered me so much, but the smell was horrible. And I don't mean it smelled bad, I mean unbreathably bad. I mean, I could taste it bad. I had to run out of the room and stop editing the audio from the conversation with Doc. I couldn't stand it. After a while, I came back in, I held my breath while I set up a fan to blow those noxious fumes out the window. Now, I should mention that we didn't have the window open very far because Steve took our screens out to be replaced, and we knew if we opened the window any farther, one of our idiot cats would climb out on the roof. The only good thing about this whole story is it didn't end with the cat out on the roof. But I did have one last problem. I got the audio edited in spite of everything, attached it to Feeder, and I pushed the audio up. I verified that the episode showed up in Overcast just fine. Then I hit preview on the blog post, and I double-checked that I could play the audio file from the web page, and it said file not found. Oh, come on. How could it be working in my podcatcher, but the file not work on the blog? I use a text expander snippet to create the URL for the web page, so it can't be wrong. Well, it turns out it can be, because sometimes I forget which show I'm publishing, and I use the NosillaCast text expander snippet instead of the Chit Chat Across the Pond snippet. But sadly, that wasn't the problem this time. I stared and stared and stared at that URL, and I couldn't see what was wrong with it. I needed to look at what the podcast feed thought the URL was, because obviously it's working. The easiest way for me to see the feed is to open the URL inside of Firefox. For some reason, Firefox doesn't render it, but it shows you the raw text instead. If you want to try it out yourself, you could go find the URL in the show notes. Anyway, with the feed open, I compared the URL for the enclosure character by character until I got all the way to the very end, and I discovered that the file I had uploaded was the AAC file, .m4a extension, not an MP3. That meant I never ran off Phonic Leveler on the file because that does the MP3 transcoding for me. This means that the file doesn't meet the loudness standards, but luckily we both have great mics and the levels were set well, so the audio came out pretty good. Now, the reason my podcast player could play this M4A file, but the blog could not, is because on my blog post, my text expander snippet very carefully types in MP3 for the file extension and file type. After I fixed that, it was finally working on the blog. In nearly 16 years of podcasting, I have never had that many things go wrong with a podcast recording, and I hope that record stands for a very long time.
So I did see one typo, type versus tip.
Yeah, I just saw that too.
Want me to fix it?
Sure. Yeah, look for the word because misspelled. BECUASE, I think it was.
All right, I'll do both.
Okay. Now let me go make a chapter mark here. So wasn't that a fun story?
Yeah, sounds like you had a great time.
I have a theory that it was the I just had the vaccine that morning, and I'm wondering whether it made me like hypersensitive to smell, because I've worked with goof off before and it didn't bother me at all.
It might have been.
I mean, it's not a smell I would choose to smell, but
I'm not seeing the because, but I would kind of need to know the misspelled version.
I just spelled it for you. BECUASE. All right. If it's not there, maybe I misspelled it another way. But I'm going to get back to work. We tend to lump all our issues onto a single customer. It's more efficient that way. That's nice, Mike.
Sounded okay.
Oh, Googon is better, huh? Actually, is ours Googon or is it Goof Off?
I think it's Googon. It's got a citrus smell to it.
Okay, that's what Bruce is saying. Yeah, it was a Googon, but it was like I thought I was going to die. All right. Did you find the typo, Steve?
Yeah, I'm fixing it and saving.
Okay.
Oh, this is
all right.
This is still draft.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't publish.
I didn't.
Okay. All right. I am going to start recording again. I recently walked you through the process Steve and I went through to deal with a Synology disk station that was running out of space. I ended the story by explaining that I pulled 2 of the 4 terabyte drives, replaced them with 8 terabyte drives, which gained me 4 terabytes in the Synology. Then I bought a dual bay RAID enclosure from OWC. Our plan was to pull 2 terabytes of old raw video footage and put it on the RAID enclosure. For the cost of 2 drives in the enclosure, we'd gain 6 terabytes total. When I finished explaining our strategy, I was awaiting the RAID enclosure's arrival, so we'll pick up our story right there. The Synology DS1019 Plus sports a USB 3.0 port on the front and one on the back, so I didn't bother buying the snazziest new OWC RAID enclosure that has, Thunderbolt 4 and all this kind of stuff. Maybe it's Thunderbolt 3. Anyway, this older one was going to be fine. I purchased the OWC Mercury Elite Pro Dual 2-Bay USB 3.0 RAID enclosure for $89 from B&H Photo. I don't get to do much hardware work these days, so I was looking forward to getting my hands dirty, as dirty as they get handling electronics. Now, I'm spoiled by the ease of adding and removing drives from the Synology, where it is literally a toolless process. The drives can be removed by tilting a lever and then pulling off 2 basic little plastic constraints that hold the drives in place by their side screw holes. I envisioned the OWC enclosure being much the same. I thought there'd be 2 sets of guide rails into which I would slide the 5.25-inch hard drives with their connectors seating automatically. Instead, working on the OWC enclosure felt like the good old days. There were 2 sets of SATA connectors hanging on long wires, along with a pair of power and data connector wires for each of the 2 drives. The instructions said to drop one hard drive all the way into the enclosure, connect its 2 cables, and then drop the second one on top and connect its cables, and only then use the screws on the side to secure the hard drives. That is a completely impossible process. I was surprised at the amount of contortion required to twist the connector wires literally 180 degrees from their resting positions, and I had to fight between the 2 pairs because they were intertwined. I say the process described was impossible because there's no way you could execute it with the drive already dropped into the enclosure. The drive simply had to be suspended in the air in order to seat the connectors successfully. I also disobeyed the instructions on when to put both drives in before securing their side screws. It would have been much harder to slightly lift the lower drive to move it into position to align the mounting holes. I'm a rebel, so I even rotated the enclosure onto its side, unlike what they said to do, so that the drives would stay in place while I let gravity easily drop the screws into the holes. I do have to say that when the enclosure is reassembled, it is really adorable and compact, considering it has 2 full-size drives inside. As I said in the last article, it looks like a tiny cheese grater Mac Pro. It's quite adorable. The OWC enclosure I purchased has eSATA as well as USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports. It comes with its own device cable with USB 3 Type B to connect to the enclosure and USB Type A to connect to the Synology. Now, Stephen Getz told me after I did all of this that my Synology had an eSATA connector, so I could have used that. But anyway, it came with this USB 3 Type B connector. Sadly, the cable was only 2 feet long, which isn't near long enough to place the enclosure where I want it. In fact, the OWC enclosure has to sit on the ground outside of our cabinet because that cable was too short to reach to the back of the Synology. A quick trip to Monoprice and $5 plus shipping got me a 6-foot replacement, so I was able to put it into our little cabinet. Now that the hardware is assembled, it's time to set up the drives as a RAID array. My plan was to set it to RAID 1, which means the drives would be mirrored, but the data would be mirrored between the 2 drives. Now, this isn't as good as a true backup from one to the other, but if one drive failed, we'd still have all of the data. Now, I've only ever read about built-in hardware RAID, so I didn't really know how to configure the drives after the hardware assembly was complete. Steve noticed a little dial on the backplane of the enclosure that indicated the RAID level, so I rotated it to RAID 1, connected the drive bay to my Mac, and booted it up. I got 2 pop-ups telling me that the 2 drives were not formatted in a way my Mac could read. I'd sort of expected some sort of magic to occur and we'd just see a single drive magically formatted when I turned it on. That's not what happened. I opened Disk Utility and I formatted them both as macOS Extended Journal on Stephen Getz's advice. And again, expected the RAID enclosure to do its magic, but instead, now I got 2 separately formatted drives on my desktop, but at least my Mac could read them now. The OWC enclosure came with a small manual, but it was targeted at people who bought it populated with drives. I found the full manual online, which explained that after changing the RAID dial to the desired setting, there's a set button you're supposed to push, and only then will it do its magic. In just a minute or two, I had only one 4 terabyte unrecognized drive. Progress! Back to disk utility to format that one as macOS Extended Journaled, also known as HFS Plus. Now I had a single RAID 1 read-writable drive on my desktop. I'm sure many of you knew this process that I should have followed, but those who haven't done any hardware or software RAID, I figured my uninformed process of discovery might be valuable. Now, the Synology has a tool called File Station, which is, think of it as like Finder on the Mac or File Explorer on Windows. Stephen Getz told me that when the drive was plugged into the Synology, I'd see it in File Station as USB Share 1. That's sort of what happened. Evidently, making the two drives into a single RAID 1 drive created two partitions, so I see USB Share 1-1 and USB Share 1-2. I opened the external device's control panel, and it shows one single drive, which was more comforting. Toggling the downward chevron next to the single drive reveals those same two partitions. USB Share 1-1 is 197 megabyte partitions formatted as VFAT, which is a format I'd never even heard of before. I did a wee bit of the Googles, and I found that it has something to do with booting to EFI. The USB Share 1-2 is the one I intentionally made that's formatted HFS Plus. This confirmed that everything is working properly, but I hope that first partition doesn't confuse us at some point when I forget this entire story. Let's stop and take a sip. How are you guys doing?
Kevin joined us.
Oh, good. Oh, Bruce says if you've set up RAID on one vendor's device, you set up RAID on one vendor's device. Oh, great. So I haven't learned any useful information for the next time. Oop, I should have stopped recording there. Thought I did. This entire story. Don't tell me, Joe, you know what VFAT is? Of course you do. All right, let's keep going here. I swear, running that debugger log is what stops it from having a problem. Virtual fat? I like real fat. Okay, here we go. Now that we have this fancy new drive ready, it's time to get working to moving that 2 terabytes of old data off of the Synology and onto the little RAID array. This was going to be a bit of a task for Steve. His plan was to move things like old conference coverage to the RAID array. He saves both the final video he publishes as well as all of the source data, the raw source data. He may want to go back and remix something at a later date, so he doesn't want to throw this data away, but the chances of needing it right away on a NAS device are slim. He set up a spreadsheet to record what he was going to move and to track how much storage he would be able to save on the Synology and also on the Drobo that backs up this data. As things like this often go, he started doing a little bit of spring cleaning while he was at it. He identified several projects he could completely delete, but then he asked me to go into his office to look at something. He pointed at File Station on the Synology and asked, "What is this hash recycle thing?" You can only imagine the facepalm we both did at that moment when we realized there's a recycle bin on the Synology. We've only had the Synology for 9 months, but every single thing we ever deleted was sitting in that recycle bin. But it gets worse. Remember that I back up the Synology to a Drobo 5N2 using Carbon Copy Cloner. That means Carbon Copy Cloner was copying the recycle bin for every one of our file shares to the Drobo, which is also running out of space. But it's even worse than that. Carbon Copy Cloner has a really useful feature called Safety Net. Let's say you have 10 files on your internal drive, and you back them up to an external drive with Carbon Copy Cloner. Then let's say you delete 2 of the files on the internal drive, and you run the backup again. If you have Safety Net enabled on the destination drive, when Carbon Copy Cloner runs the backup, it will recognize that those 2 files got deleted, but instead of throwing them away, it puts them in a separate folder called Safety Net. If you run out of space on the destination drive, it will start to purge the Safety Net folder. So now realize what we've been doing. We delete the files on the Synology, which puts them in the recycle bin. Carbon Copy Cloner backs up the Synology to the Drobo, backing up not just the recycle bin, but also moving those exact same deleted files into the safety net folder. So now, not only does the Drobo have the deleted files, it also has 2 copies of everything we have ever deleted. At one point, I checked Just Steve's large video folder on the Drobo, on which we had stopped using Carbon Copy Cloner a while back, and the recycle bin was 258 gigabytes, and Safety Net was 1.18 terabytes. Oh my gosh. So my data is mostly audio. So normally I'm not a huge contributor to this problem, but my folder had another 426 gigabytes of data in the recycle bin. That is close to 2 terabytes of stuff we thought we had deleted, but all happily backed up over on the Drobo. I still can't get over the fact that we had no idea we were doing this. So once I got over being so uninformed about what I'd been doing, I realized this was tremendously good news. I knew that throwing $400 at my Synology was going to give us breathing room, but that wasn't going to solve the problem on the Drobo. I was worried I'd need to start adding drives on it pretty soon as well. But after getting rid of everything in #recycle and everything in Safety Net from Carbon Copy Cloner and moving the 2 terabytes of videos off to the RAID drive, I am happy to report that the Synology has nearly 10 terabytes free and the Drobo has 6.2 terabytes free. I feel like we could go ballroom dancing in all that empty space. There was one final step to complete before declaring victory. I went into Carbon Copy Cloner, and for every shared folder on the Synology, I disabled backup of the recycle folder, and I made careful decisions on whether I wanted Safety Net on each of these shared folders. In the end, only our financial medical folder got to keep Safety Net. I normally like to finish my stories with the bottom line of what you should learn from the story I've just told. At the very least, if you ever get a Synology, remember there's a recycle bin. I hope you learned a little bit about sizing drives for RAID arrays, whether they're in a Synology or a simple 2-bay RAID array. And I hope you enjoyed learning all of this along with me. Isn't that hilarious? Okay, Jill didn't know it had it either. Or recycling Bing, is that what I said? Did I say Bing? I'm keeping it. Oh, you're just yanking my chain? So we got a lot of room.
That we do.
We are going to have to, we're going to have to figure out how to remember that. Right? All right. Oh, it's, I'm not going to do a chapter mark, Kevin, so remind me in just a second, because I'm going to do pledge break now. Well, this is going to be a longer show than I thought. This is going to be good. All right, here we go. I would like to throw out a special thanks to Wayne Dixon and Rick Snyder for becoming patrons of the Podfeed podcast. These 2 lovely gentlemen went to podfeed.com/Patreon, and they made very generous pledges to help support the show. As I mentioned last week, I don't need to make money off the podcast, but it sure would be swell if it didn't cost me so much to do the show. When Amazon dropped me as an affiliate last year, that nearly cut the income in half, so I rely completely on fine patrons like Wayne and Rick to help offset the costs of doing the shows, and the people who do the one-time donations at PayPal. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate your support. Ooh, I think I cut myself off. Really appreciate your support. Oh, no, I didn't. All right, now we need a chapter mark. I'm going to do a palate cleanser. Believe it or not, the next topic's going to, after this, it's going to be another Synology story from George from Tulsa.
You got adequate reminders from Kevin, by the way.
Did I get enough?
More than adequate.
All right. Oh, nope, that one. This one. All right. This one's another nerdy one. Here we go. In the Programming by Stealth podcast I do with Bart Bouchatz, we had an argument? No, I think it was called an assignment. That's the word I'm looking for. Assignment. Did you hear it, Steve?
Yes.
In the Programming by Stealth podcast I do with Bart Bouchatz, we had an assignment a while back to create a web app that would show the time in 2 different cities of their choice. I took the assignment up a notch and added a little slider you could drag to change the time in both cities at the same time. The problem this solves is how to know what time it will be in the future at two different places. Let's say you're trying to tell someone like, I don't know, Doc Rock, what time the next Apple event will be in their time zone at this future time. This would be a perfect tool to solve that problem. I enhanced my app to not just show the time, but the date as well. Bart gave us an additional challenge and asked us to see if we could create a method for someone using our clock to copy the times into a URL that could be sent to someone else. The idea was that the recipient could simply click the link they were sent, and they would see the two cities with the same times in them as they were when the URL was sent. This sounded like a great enhancement to my time-shifting clock. Instead of having to write out an elaborate email with the explanation of the time chosen, I could just send people a link. You can see how cool this clock is at podfeet.com. And there's, of course, a link in the show notes. Now, I told you all about my amazing clock back when I finished it, regaling you with the different technologies I used and the technical decisions I made during the design. But as soon as it was done and officially released as version 1.0, I knew that I wanted my little app to do more. The problem I wanted to solve was how to allow the user to choose more than two cities. Dr. Gary, our resident memory psychologist from New Zealand, loves my clock app because she is often trying to set up meetings with people in different time zones, but she's most often dealing with many people in multiple cities, not just two. The first step was to figure out how to add a button allowing the user to add another city, and I accomplished that part of the code pretty quickly. I had to pick a default city for all of the additional clocks, and since Marianne had already complained that the first two were in Los Angeles and Dublin for some reason, I made all subsequent clocks show the time for Auckland, New Zealand. Now, the hard part has been working on modifying the URL that gets copied and sent to someone. Without the pressure of a due date for an assignment, I must admit, I haven't been working very consistently on this app. I didn't realize how long I'd been so occasionally doodling with it until I looked up the release date of version 1.0, and it was September of 2019. But hey, 2020 was hard, okay? Give me a break. Well, the algorithm in my app that figures out what time it is in a given city uses a very popular JavaScript library called moment.js. When someone types in the name of a city, my app tries to find a match in the city listing, and if it can, it figures out the time using moment.js. When they drag the slider, it just adds hours to the time it already figured out. The URL that I create then contains the name of the city chosen, along with the time and date selected. The city name actually includes the region too, so it would be Europe/Dublin, for example. I also have a field on the screen that says the time in Europe/Dublin becomes. Now that needs to be in the URL too, so it can be typed on screen for the recipient. Bart also told us we had to include a toggle for the user to view the time in either 12 or 24-hour format. I figured that since I was letting the user send all that other info, why not let them send the time in the format they'd chosen? I had all of this working in version 1.0 of my Timeshifter clock app, but my method created a really, really long URL. I just counted, and the URL is 260 characters long to represent the time in Los Angeles and Dublin. Now, I was willing to live with that for version 1.0, but imagine what this URL would look like if Marianne invited 5 people to her grant review meeting. It would be paragraphs long, and nobody would click it. They would assume it was spam, or at least I would. When Bart was working on his clock app, along with the rest of the class, he didn't put the time of both cities in the URL. Instead, he put the absolute time chosen in Coordinated Universal Time, also known as UTC. Both clocks on the page could have their time calculated relative to UTC by using the time offset that moment.js can give us. Dorothy did her clock this way as well. I knew that using UTC would dramatically simplify my URL. I'm very pleased to say that I did not copy their code, even though I know I had access to it and I could have copied it. In fact, I didn't even look at how they did it. I used the documentation to figure it out how to get moment.js to do the time offset for me. I also figured out how to put the line time in Dublin becomes into the clocks without having to repeat it in the URL. The URL would then simply contain the time in UTC and then the 2 plus city names. It would be ever so much more readable because you'd see that most of it was just a listing of the city names. I wrote a little side program to prove to myself that given time in UTC, I could convert it back to any city I wanted, so I got all of that worked out. Once I knew I could conquer the time math with UTC, I figured out how to create a button for the user to add more cities, change the defaults, and get the slider to shift all of the times. The button to copy the URL worked perfectly to copy the times in UTC and the names of all the cities. I was cooking with gas now. But there's one big problem to be solved. When the recipient clicks the URL they've been sent, I had to figure out how to pull the city names and UTC times out of the URL and shove them back into my clocks. Now, I'd done this before with 2 clocks, but since I knew there were only 2, I had hardwired the variable names of the clocks into my code. I named them SC1 and SC2. Well, now I have to have my code check that URL and find any number of clocks. There might be 2, but Marianne might invite 28 people to hear her fascinating grant proposal, right? So I'm looking at this URL and trying to figure out how do I find matches for the strings when I don't know how many there will be. Great Scott! This is a perfect time for regular expressions. This was too good to be true that 2 weeks in a row I would get to use regular expressions. I got into my thinking chair, that's the one that won't let me touch a keyboard, and I pulled out my trusty physical copy of the Taming the Terminal book yet again. I didn't know exactly which regular expression I was looking for, so I just opened the book to chapter 17 and I started to read. In Bart's explanation of where regular expressions can help, he says, the key point is that if you can describe a pattern as a series of elements that follow one another, then you should be able to write a regular expression to represent that pattern. Well, I certainly can describe a pattern for finding the city names. The city names will be preceded by the letters SC, followed by 1 or more digits, followed by an equal sign, and then inside quotes will be the region/city name. Clearly, a regular expression was called for. A few paragraphs in, though, I read the quote Bart loves to say about regular expressions. The fact that many programmers don't understand the limitations of regular expressions has led to the incorrect maxim that if you have a problem and you try to solve it with regular expressions, that you then have 2 problems, your original problem and a regular expression. Well, anyway, I knew that it was important to relearn it properly. I would end up right where Bart said I'd be, with a problem and a regular expression. I kept reading and studying, and eventually I had a list of different approaches to the problem. I let myself get out of my thinking chair and I went to regex101.com to start testing out some of my regular expression ideas on a sample URL with 3 cities. I did not succeed. I got frustrated and finally decided to try the Googles for some help with regular expressions. Now here's the really funny part. Regular expressions are not the solution to this problem after all. I tried all kinds of search terms for how I was trying to make a match in regular expressions, and finally I just happened to include the term URL in my search on Google. It turns out there's a perfectly lovely method in JavaScript called URL search params that is designed to do exactly what I want to do. With URL search params, you create an object and then query that URL. There's even a built-in feature that allows you to iterate through the URL looking for the variables you seek. Reading through the documentation, it says URL search params.entries returns an iterator allowing iteration through all key value pairs included in this object. This is exactly what I needed. I didn't know how many cities would be in the URL, so I needed to iterate through it to find them all. And this method already knew the pattern I was looking for because URLs all have the same pattern of key value pairs. But here's the funny part. When I look back through my version 1 code, I had used URL search params to find information in my URL. But this is not a failure on my part. It's a sign that I'm a real developer. Because think about the progression of events here. I knew a tool that I thought could solve my problem, so I studied the documentation to see if it was the correct tool. Instead of persisting at using a wrench to drive in a nail, I kept digging until I found the right tool. Now, it would have been less embarrassing if I hadn't found the tool in the bottom of my own toolbox, but even at that, I studied the documentation for it, and I discovered something new that I didn't know that it could do. I didn't know it had an iterator. From the very beginning, Bart has stressed that he's teaching us to program, not teaching us a specific language. He's also continuously stressed the importance of learning to read the documentation. He stressed that he's looked up. Okay, double fumble there. He stressed. I think I'll save while I do that cut. He has also stressed that he's. Nope. He's also continuously reminded us of the importance of learning to read. Now, I'm reading the same line again. Got the same thing twice. From the very beginning. From the very beginning. Let's start there. From the very beginning, Bart has stressed to us that he's teaching us to program, not teaching us a specific language. He's also continuously stressed the importance of learning to read the documentation. He reminds us that he looks up things all day long himself. This method of teaching means none of us feel stupid when we don't know something. We feel mighty when we solve a problem, even if it's discovering something we already partly knew. Now, I haven't gotten my URL query working just yet, but I know I'll solve this. A few years ago, I would bang my head against the wall of programming with no idea how to proceed. Now I inch along, fixing little things, making big discoveries, but I seem to always move forward. I'm learning, and I'm having fun, and I feel powerful. It doesn't get better than that, does it? There we go.
Oh, hey, there is a link in there that is not a secure link, so it's not active. It won't work here. Did you intend to make that secure, or was it?
Which link?
Well, it's the second of the two under UTC time, under the UTC time section, a couple paragraphs in.
What are the words around? What's the word say?
http://localhost 5662.
Yeah. Yeah, that's maybe I should make it not a link. Because it's a that's at localhost, so it's not secure. It's not
gotcha.
So here,
Not a web link. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but that will break on my site.
It's an
right?
active, but it looks active and it is clickable.
Yeah, I'm fixing it. There it is. Shoot. Yeah, no, this is okay. Okay. Oh, I changed it in. Actually, I just I fixed the wrong one. There you go. That'll make it go to my real clock, but let me get rid of it in this one. The other one will be. Yeah, that one won't be a link. Okay, thank you. Good call.
Sure. So is it now in the actual post?
I'm pushing it up. Can you double check and make sure it didn't switch to draft? You know how it does that.
Try.
Oh shoot, yeah. Okay, I gotta refresh. All right, George from Tulsa coming up, and guess what he's going to talk about?
I have
Synology.
Yes.
Okay, so let's see. I'm going to here.
Okay, yeah. Now it's not a hot link.
Okay. All right, I'm going to do chapter mark.
Yes.
Copy link. Copy. We're getting a little long, so I don't know that I'm going to play much, if any, of this. But let me go ahead and record here. All right, George from Tulsa is up next. George from Tulsa is up next. Half a story. All right, 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 half a story.
Hold on.
All right, half a story. 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 All right, half a
Muted the output. emotes all over it. It's still happening, yeah. Last time, did you have to quit? There, just stop. I did, but that didn't stop that only stops it for the people listening live. What? Well, it's most painful for the people listening live in Discord. I don't.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, Alan, don't post things like that again. I deleted that and I never want to see stuff like that again. You're on notice. Don't do that. That was disgusting. Okay, so here we go. I am going to thanks. No problem. All right. So I'm going to try to record again. I hope I've got that. Yeah, I just hope I captured it. I think I did.
Good.
Which is good news. No problem, Alan. No problem. No hard feelings. There's just something I don't like. All right, here we go. Well, next up, we've got George from Tulsa, and he's got a story that just also happens to be about Synology, but it's from a completely different perspective, and I think it's really interesting. So let's have a listen. All right, drop in George. That is good news. It's been driving me crazy that I haven't been able to sample that. So catching it, that's good news. Because I didn't say it in the thing that where I talked about all the problems that I had, but they said that activity monitor thing was no help at all. Really? Yeah. George from Tulsa, Synology for Podfeet edited AIF. There we go. Okay, let's listen a little bit. Yeah, they said I had to get this sample, and I think I just caught it. So let's listen here. Really interesting. So let's have a listen.
On March 24th, 2020, Tulsa issued a COVID stay-at-home order. As I locked our office door that night, I had no idea when I'd be back. My real concern wasn't work-related. It was the April 19th due date of my daughter's second child, exactly on what was predicted would be the very worst day for COVID hospitalizations in Tulsa. How naive that seems now.
Okay.
Little tease.
Yep, just a little tease there. All right, plus we're almost out of time. 5:58. Okay.
Show notes at podfeet.com.
Well, thanks for that, George. That's an interesting thing. I learned a lot listening to George. For example, I did not know that I could do two-factor authentication. So I have just set that up on my Synology because it was kind of bothering me that Quick Connect seemed a little bit, I don't know, not enough security wrapped around that for what I wanted. So now I've got two-factor authentication going, and there's something else he taught me in that, but I can't remember what it is right now. But there's so much to these Synologies. It's really fun to learn from people who know way more than I do. Well, that's going to wind us up for this week. Don't forget to send in your dumb questions. We haven't had a dumb question in a really long time. Dumb questions are those questions where you think that everybody else probably knows the answer, but you don't. It's not for the hard questions. These are the dumb questions I like. Anyway, you can send those in, your Everything is Fiddly recordings, comments, and suggestions by emailing me at allison@podfeet.com. And you can follow me on Twitter @podfeet. Please remember, everything good starts with podfeet.com. You want to go to Patreon, become a cool patron of the Podfeed podcast? Podfeed.com/Patreon. You want to try that one-time donation thing? Podfeed.com/PayPal. Want to join our community? You can do that in Slack at podfeed.com/Slack or in Facebook at podfeed.com/Facebook. And if you want to join in the fun of the live show, head on over to podfeed.com/live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific time and join the friendly and enthusiastic NosillaCastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed.
I'd like to do one really quick test on the Rumble problem.
Oh, good. I will let you test as long as you want to fix that.
If I mute my mic, which I will do right now, I'm at the interface itself, the hardware interface. Tell me if it goes away. I'm muting now.
Yep. Well, look at your little Dynamics processor. You can see it.
Yeah, I don't leave that up, but kind of it gets in the way of my other displays that I need to. But
yeah.
I guess for a test, I can see that.
But yeah, no, it's definitely coming in through your mic. There's no question. Yeah, Alan, stay followers. I've got to do something because now Apple has changed it so a subscriber is paid. So maybe I just tell everybody stay subscribed and now you all pay me. That would be perfect.
So when they introduced this change of terminology a few months ago, we were wondering, well, what was the significance? Now we know.
Yep. Keep listening.
Following.
I got to work on this. Yeah, I don't know.
Doesn't have the same ring.
I could say keep following. Yeah. Keep following.
And be sure
I got to get my vocal fry in there.
Following.
Stay followed. Follow along. NosillaCastaways. Thanks for listening and stay subscribed. There it is. If you stay subscribed, Apple's limiting that to paid people. I don't know. No, it isn't. But they're creating two separate things. A subscription is paid. A follow is you get it for free. They're making it so that people can charge for podcasts if they want to. It just provides another mechanism for it. You could always have paid podcasts, but people had to roll their own.
So the actual button will say follow or subscribe. There'll be two distinct buttons to join a podcast.
How many links should I have, Steve?
Well, I count 4.
All right. We got 4. We're golden. All right. I think we are done. I'm going to export to...
On the positive side, we had no noticeable stuttering or delays between audio and video. So you get one or the other. You either get looping or you get delays.
Yeah. You sound like you're inside of a tin can. Oh, that's because I've got both audio sources coming out. I got to figure that out, too. All right. This has been fun, guys. I'm going to say goodbye. I think Rose snuck in at the end there, so I can kiss her goodbye. Goodbye, Rose. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.